Good evening, everyone. This week's Parsha is Parshas Bamidbar, Tavshin Pei Daled. We'll begin Parak Aleph Pasuk Aleph, chapter 1, verse 1. Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe midbar Sinai ba'oil ma'id. Hashem spoke to Moshe in the Sinai desert, in the tabernacle. Be'echad lachedesh hasheni, on the first day of the second month, Bashana hashenis of the second year, let's say Sameretz Mitzrayim, of their leaving Egypt, Lamar saying. So, and then the Torah talks about how Hashem told Moshe to take a census of the Jewish people. We're going to focus on a medrash on the first pasuk in the parsha, where the medrash is bothered by the fact that the Torah feels it necessary to mention that Hashem spoke to Moshe in Midbar Sinai, in the desert of Sinai, the Sinai desert. You know, in the book of Vayikra, typically it doesn't even tell us where it says Hashem spoke to Moshe. Parshas Bahar, it mentioned Behar Sinai, on Mount Sinai, and there's a whole discussion as to why the Torah does that. Okay, but if the Torah feels it necessary here to mention that it was on Sinai, so why mention Bamidbar Sinai, in the Sinai desert? What is the point of mentioning that it's a desert? That's what the Medrash is bothered by. What's the point of mentioning this Sinai desert? And the Medrash answers with the following, that what we have here is a concept, an idea, that B'shlosha Devar Nitna Torah, the sages tell us the Torah was given with three things. Ba'esh, with fire, B'mayim, with water, B'midbar, in a desert. There are these three elements that were present when Hashem gave the Torah. Ba'esh minayin, how do I know there was fire? The answer is because in Parshas Yisro, when the Torah tells us about the giving of the Torah, it talks about how Mount Sinai was smoking, there was fire, so there's your fire. How do you know there was water? And that, the Medrash refers to a pasuk in Shoftim, in the book of Shoftim, book of Judges. Gam shamayim natafu, gam avim natfu mayim. Also the heavens dripped, also the clouds dripped water. And that is talking about that verse, which is part of the Song of Devorah. That part of the verse, that part of that song is referring to the giving of the Torah. So there we find water by the giving of the Torah. And where do we find desert? So the Medrash refers to our parsha, what we just read. Hashem spoke to Moshe in the Sinai desert. Therefore, that's how we see that the fact. So that's the answer to the Medrash. The Torah here is stressing Midbar Sinai because the Torah is trying to include desert as one of the three elements with which the Torah was given. That's why here, when it says Hashem spoke to Moshe, it was in the desert of Sinai, because desert, it was an element that was necessary for the giving of the Torah. Then the Medrash says, why was the Torah given with these three things? Elama elu chinam, just as these are free, to all people in the world. People have very easy access to at least fire, not hard to get fire. Water, there are definitely places in the world where water is a problem, but water generally is available. Bamidbar, and desert. You know, nowadays we pay for our water. But water is typically something that wasn't paid for. And desert, you know, if you have access to a desert, no one's going to stop you. Nobody owns it. No one wants it. It's bechinam, it's free. All these elements are elements that people have, everybody has access to them. So too, the Torah is free. If the Torah wasn't free, if you had to pay for it, there would be people who wouldn't have money to pay. But the Torah is free. It's accessible to everyone. Okay. Now, what's interesting is that the Medrash is making a common denominator between these three things. But why do we need all these three things? If there's one lesson about the fact that it's free, I need three elements to teach me that it's free. So the commentaries on the Medrash actually offer offer an explanation as to how each one of these elements actually carries its own lesson. The Medrash wants to make a common denominator between the three. The common denominator is bechinam, they're for free. But the commentaries speak about how each element actually carries its own lesson. And I want to share with you an explanation given by Rav Meir Shapiro of Lublin. Rav Meir Shapiro was the person who came up with the idea of Daf Yomi, of how Jews around the world all learn a full page, double-sided, two sides of a page of Talmud every day. He also founded a very special yeshiva in Lublin before the war. He actually died before World War II. And he offers and explains to this Medrash regarding the three elements of Eish, Mayim, and Midbar, fire, water, and desert, that they each are representing an aspect of what we call Mesiras Nefesh. Mesiras Nefesh means, literally we translate it as self-sacrifice, giving up of oneself. The ultimate self-sacrifice is when a person gives up their lives when they're supposed to for the sanctity of God. The essential Mesiras Nefesh, the essential self-sacrifice is when we give up from ourselves, when our nature is actually pushes us away from serving Hashem, and we overcome nature's pushing us away from Hashem, and we overcome that. That means we've given up from ourselves. We've given up from our physicality. We've given up from our persona. We've given up from ourselves. And that is called Mesiras Nefesh. And Mesiras Nefesh, as I said, it can go from the highest level of giving up one's life to giving up something that may just be hard to give up for the sake of serving Hashem. Lots of levels of it. Now, Rav Meir Shapiro suggested that the three elements represent three different situations of Mesiras Nefesh. You could have a Mesiras Nefesh of an individual. A person faces a personal challenge, and sometimes, and when they are ready to give up from themselves that personal challenge, that is Mesiras Nefesh, self-sacrifice, dedication. And it can come out that there are some times where something happens. There's this one-time act of self-sacrifice that you need to do. Something comes, there's a situation that comes your way. It's a one-time thing, and that is your challenge. This is your mission. Your mission is to deal with this one-time deal of being ready to be Mesiras Nefesh, to become completely dedicated and give up from yourself. Then you have where many people have to do that. A community has to do that. There are certain times that a group of people, a community, have to be ready to give up from themselves for the sake of God. A Mesiras Nefesh, again, a one-time Mesiras Nefesh of a community. And then there are situations of Mesiras Nefesh, of self-sacrifice, whether it be on an individual level or on a communal level, of a constant Mesiras Nefesh. That there is an ongoing situation that in order to be able to overcome that ongoing situation in the service of Hashem, you got to be ready to have constant Mesiras Nefesh, constant dedication, constant self-sacrifice. So therefore, it says Rav Meir Shapiro that each one of the elements represents an example of these three things we just mentioned. And each one represents a person, an episode in the history of the Jewish people in the Torah. Fire represents Abraham. Our forefather Abraham, he displayed self-sacrifice in regard to fire because the wicked king Nimrod told him to stop believing God, or he's going to throw him into a furnace of fire, which he did, and Avram was miraculously saved. But Avram was ready to give up his life. Avram was ready this was a one-time self-sacrifice situation, a very important one. So the Torah being given with fire is to remind us of Abraham, who with fire was ready to give up everything, that he was ready to give up everything for Hashem. Okay? Then we have water. who does water represent? So that, Rabbi Shapiro said, water represents a situation where many people displayed self-sacrifice. And he says that's referring to the episode by the splitting of the Red Sea, where Moshe told the Jewish people to go into the water before it even split. And the Gemara, the Medrash tells about different versions, but there's a version that says that the first one to jump in was Nachshon ben Aminadav from the tribe of Yehuda. It was Nachshon, son of Aminadav. And after him, a tribe followed. I think that either the tribe of Benjamin or the tribe of Judah, but it was not just one person there who did that. Hashem said, go into the water. And when they went into the water, they really didn't know what was going to be. Or the water didn't necessarily split right away. The Gemara says that they kept going into the water deeper, 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 until they're basically drowning. And at that point, they turned to Hashem, and then Hashem split the water. But that was an example of self-sacrifice of many people, being ready to jump into the water because Hashem is said to do that, even though it didn't seem like it wasn't clear to them what was going to happen. That's the second example. So water is meant to remind us of the Mesiras Nefesh, of the self-sacrifice of Nachshon and those who followed him into the water. The third example is going to be an example of where you had a situation of constant Mesiras Nefesh, self-sacrifice. And I've always been so, I don't know what, I can't find the right word, always been like astounded of this example that he gives. And he says the situation of constant self-sacrifice was the Jewish people in the desert for 40 years. The fact that the Jewish people followed God in the desert for 40 years is the example of constant self-sacrifice. Now, I've always been surprised by this because the Jewish people, they were in the desert, but they had the man, the food that fell from heaven. They had water. They had the 7 clouds of glory protecting them. Seemed like everything was pretty good. But we also know that there was a point that the Torah tells us that the Jewish people became tired of traveling in the desert. And although that was considered a serious sin, but the fact that the vast majority of the time in the desert they didn't complain shows a dedication on their part. It wasn't easy being in the desert, but they went. They followed Hashem. When the cloud of glory picked itself up from the tabernacle and traveled, they traveled. Did they know how long they were going to travel for, where they were going to settle, how long they were going to settle there for? They followed Hashem in the desert. And they showed tremendous dedication and self-sacrifice in doing so. It wasn't easy. And therefore, what the desert represents is the constant self-sacrifice of the Jewish people in the desert. That is Rabbi Shapiro's explanation of the 3 elements that were present at the giving of the Torah. Now, I want to share with you a fascinating story of an individual who displayed self-sacrifice, Mesiras Nefesh, on a constant basis. Perhaps you've come across this, but it's a story of the story begins. We'll begin the story with this picture. Now, I think you can see this picture pretty well. The problem is I cannot read it backwards, but maybe I'll try because I've done this a couple of times already. And this is a gravestone. And on it, the person who was buried asked that the following should be inscribed on his tombstone, on his gravestone. I served in the United States Marine Corps in World War II as a staff sergeant. Okay, I got to read it. Sorry. I managed to put on tefillin every day. That's what it says there. I managed to put on tefillin every day, even during combat in the Pacific, and refrained from eating meat the entire time. The Almighty helped me to survive. That's this tombstone. That's this gravestone. A couple of years ago, a brother-in-law of mine sent this to me, and in general, it went wild. It was like it spread like not using the right internet term, but it spread like fire. And it's really unbelievable. And who was this man? Who was he? Well, he was a man named Bernie Haller. Man named Bernie Haller. He was born in 1919 on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. And his father was a tailor. And what's very interesting about his father was, and this is an article, you could find it on Chabad.org. And his grandson says, Bernie's grandson told over that his grandfather was the kind of person who fought hard to keep Shabbos. He was the kind of person that had a job on Friday, and because he didn't show up to work on Shabbos, he was fired, had to come find a new job. This was a person who really displayed self-sacrifice on a regular basis for Shabbos, to keep Shabbos. Okay? Now, the article continues. Money was tight for the Hallers, and as a result, young Bernie couldn't afford yeshiva tuition. Instead, Bernie used to head over to a local yeshiva after school and sit outside the window to catch whatever bits and pieces of the Torah lessons he could. That's amazing. That's unbelievable. Unbelievable. So we already, that's also constant self-sacrifice. His father's self-sacrifice, his self-sacrifice. But as we just read from his tombstone, from his gravestone, that the ultimate self-sacrifice he displayed was the fact that when he was in the armed forces, he never missed putting on tefillin. He saw combat in the Pacific, as he says on the gravestone. He never missed putting on tefillin. He managed to do it quietly because it's not like he didn't experience anti-Semitism. And he wouldn't eat meat. He wouldn't eat non-kosher meat. And it didn't stop there, his self-sacrifice, or what he had to put up with. Let's put it that way. In the article, it reads, when one cook found out that the Jewish staff sergeant was avoiding meat, he began adding lard to the vegetables he served out of spite. When Haller found out, he switched to eating only raw vegetables. Okay. Harassment came in other ways as well. To avoid attracting undue attention from his fellow Marines, Haller would put on tefillin when no one else was around. Still, they taunted him with slurs, referring to him as Benny the Heb. One evening, the group held him down and began to ruffle his hair. "What are you doing?" Haller asked in confusion. "We're looking for your horns," came the retort. "Jews hide them during the day, but they come out at night." That's what he had to put up with. But as time went by and they saw Haller's courage under fire, the harassment faded. Haller remained ever committed to Hashem, recognizing his works and assistance in the many ways he survived. Like the time his platoon was to be sent to Iwo Jima in the winter of 1945. On the eve of the difficult battle, nearly 7,000 Americans lost their lives on the island. Haller's entire platoon developed yellow eyes, a sure sign of yellow fever. The commanding officer held the platoon back, only for later to be discovered that the change in eye color was caused by something the platoon had eaten. Because of that, their lives were spared. So here was a man who showed his self-sacrifice. He displayed his self-sacrifice to Yiddishkeit on a constant basis. And as he said on his gravestone, the Almighty helped me to survive. And I'll show you a picture of what he looked like towards the end of his life, or as he got older. This is Bernie Haller later on in life. So that's an example of an individual who was on his own in the United States Marine Corps during World War II, seeing combat. And he displayed consistent Mesiras Nefesh. That is truly something to be inspired by. And again, that is what the three elements with which the Torah was given represent. Self-sacrifice of the individual on a one-time basis, self-sacrifice of many people on a one-time basis, and then self-sacrifice on a consistent basis. May Hashem give us the strength to be able to stay strong and to be dedicated under all situations, and to be ready to give up and have the strength to give up from ourselves for the sake of Hashem and His Torah. Thank you all for listening. And next Tuesday night is already Shavuos, and therefore I wish you this coming Shabbos, have a wonderful Shabbos, and a wonderful Shavuos. Chag Sameach, all the best. Thank you for listening.